Assalamualaikum. I'm Nur Farhana binti Anwar. Today, Saiful Nazmi and I will be presenting on losing my father. We divided our slides into three parts, which will be the introduction part, the analysis, and the conclusion. In the introduction part, we will discuss about the author and the summary of this story. So, let's first start with the author. The story is written by Watanabe On. Watanabe-san was a Japanese author inspirational to upcoming Japanese author. He was born on August 26, 1902 in Hokkaido, Japan, and he died on February 10, 1930. There is a source, a Japanese website, if I'm not mistaken, stated that Watanabe-san died in a railway accident, but we could not confirm it since that particular site was the only site that provided such information. We also tried our best to find any other information about Watanabe-san, but the only site that have a little bit of information about him is Wikipedia. We assume that there was not much information about him because he died at a young age. The next part is summary. We assume that not all have read the story yet, so that's why we are providing a bit of summary about the story. So the story is about a father who abandoned his son. The father did not want to be around the son because he did not want to be mistaken as brothers. The father had luggage with him, but the son had no idea about his father's intention. In the end, the father left the son, and the son finally realized that he is left alone. The next part of these slides is the analysis. We tried our best to provide a full and detailed analysis on this short story. Of course, in a narrative or creative writing, there will be a plot, which is the sequence of events that make up the story. In the short story Losing My Father, the story starts with the exposition. The son wakes up from his sleep and sees his father shave his beard for the first in quite a while. The father tells him they are going to the harbor for the rising action. On the way there, the father refuses to be close to his son as they might be mistaken as brothers. They take a train to the harbor. The father jokes that they might even ride one when the son asks if they are going to see a ship. During the climax, the father boards the SS Sakusonia and bids farewell and thank you to his son. The son waves back without realizing the situation yet. The father ultimately abandons his son. Now we look at the last two parts of the plot, which are falling action and resolution. Falling action. The son sits down. A customs officer puts his hand on the son's shoulder and asks if the son wanted to throw himself into the water. Lastly, the resolution. The son finally realizes that he lost his father. He tries to describe his father's face to the customs officer but fails. The son is determined to remember the father's face, both with and without the beard.
Now, let's take a look at the characters in this short story. As explained by Farhana during the plot of the story, we can identify that this story only contains three characters, namely the father, the son, and also the customs officer. Well, do bear in mind that the author didn't include any names for the characters, so yeah, I guess it's easier for us to remember them during the test. Without further ado, let's dive into the first character, which is the father. The father is a young Japanese man who had a son at a very early age. Since the author didn't introduce the mother's character in the story, I guess as a reader we can just assume that the mother had passed away or maybe she left him with all the responsibilities when both of them had a baby. Moreover, the age gap between the father and the son is very small as they are just 10 years apart from each other. Hence, the father portrayed an unloving and emotionally abusive character in this short story. As we analyze the short story, we identify that the father always scolded and threatened his son. Not to mention that the father also called the son idiot. Well, since he doesn't want to endure the responsibility of raising his son, he decided to start over a new life by abandoning the son at the harbor. Moving on to the second character, which is the son. The son is a young Japanese child who lives without the presence of his mother. Throughout the whole story, it can be identified that the son longed for the affection from his father, but unfortunately, he didn't receive the love that he deserved. At the beginning of this story, the son was really excited when his father asked him to get ready as they are going to spend time together at the harbor. So, it's very clear that the son didn't get to spend his time with his father before this, right? Other than that, the son also portrayed a character as a curious child by asking many questions when his father acted peculiarly when the father suddenly wear new outfits. Well, I guess he's just being a kid. That's why he asks a lot of questions. Then, towards the end of the story, the son became helpless after he was abandoned by his own father at the harbor, resulting in him to stay at the harbor for half of the day, trying to digest what is actually happening to him. Alright, now let's take a look at the minor character in this short story, which is the custom officer. Well, of course, he is a custom officer at the harbor, and his character is introduced during the resolution of the story where he noticed that the son was sitting alone on a huge brig. Seeing the son crying by himself, the custom officer comforted the son by saying, hey now, we can't have that. Crying won't help. Tell me what happened." Then, he was being sarcastic towards the son by saying, "Don't tell me you're planning to throw yourself into the water, yeah?" And then, after comforting the son, he was being really helpful by listing the father's description so that he can notify the next station.
So we now look at the context of the story Losing My Father take place. This story took place in Japan, an island country in East Asia located in the northwest Pacific Ocean. There are 4 main islands: Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. So as mentioned earlier, the writer was born in Hokkaido, one of the main islands. There are also nearly 4,000 small islands. Almost 4/5 of Japan is covered with mountains. The Japanese Alps run down the center of the largest island, Honshu. The highest peak is Mount Fuji, a cone-shaped volcano that is considered sacred by many Japanese. Japan also is the only country in the world with a reigning emperor. Japan is well known for their well-preserved tradition. They are also famous for their tea ceremonies. They include ceremonial preparation and presentation of matcha, powdered green tea. Tea ceremonies are considered very important to the Japanese culture. Even the placement of the utensils is very important. Considering the timeline and period of time when the author was born, it is safe to assume that this story took place in Japan sometime after World War I. So, in order to understand more about the context of the story, we'll be looking at how Japan was after World War I. After 1854, when the Tokugawa shogunate first opened the country to Western commerce, Japan went through 2 periods of economic development. When the Tokugawa shogunate was overthrown and the Meiji government was founded, Japanese westernization began completely. So Japan actually have a unique way of defining time. So Japan count years using a system of era names. The era, basically, it define an era based on the emperor that reigns during that time. So the current era is Heisei, which began when Emperor Akihito succeeded his father in 1989. So a new era will begin when his heir takes the throne. So back to the explanation of Japan after World War I. So the military expressed concern about the delays in troop movement that occurred during the 1904-1905 Russo-Japanese War and attributed such delay to the mix of private and government railway ownership. Whether reasonable or not, the attribution tipped the balance in favor of nationalization of major railway companies. So, accelerating the development of railway until what we see today, like the railway system, the bullet train that they have in Japan. Therefore, the use of train in this story fits the time period. Also, considering that the story took place at a harbor. So, Japan's port and harbor matured under the Meiji government's policy of industrial promotion, national wealth, and military strength. Ports, harbor, railroads, roads, and any other type of social infrastructure were established during that time. So the Meiji government's policy of modernization under a centralized government was designed to help Japan to catch up with advanced Western nation. So during the time of the 1900s, where after the author was born, the use of railways and also ships were pretty much already common by that time. Also, to further understand about why the writer write in such way, we'll be looking at the Meiji, Taisho, and early Showa period of literature. So the author actually lived throughout three different eras, which are Meiji, Taisho, and Showa era. So the Meiji era marked the reopening of Japan to the West and a period of rapid industrialization. Young Japanese prose writer struggled with a whole galaxy of new ideas. So when Japan are open to the Western market, they are also exposed and also influenced by the Western literature. So example of writing genre that emerged during this period of time were realism, romanticism, naturalism, neo-romanticism, and neo-realism. And for Losing My Father, we can categorize this piece of writing into realism. Also, writers began to write in colloquial form. For example, Higuchi Ichio, a rare woman writer in this era, wrote short stories on powerless women of this age in a simple style between literary and colloquial. So in Losing My Father, the writer also writes in a colloquial form. So his genre and way of writing fits the era of time which he lived during that time. Now we'll move on to the settings where this story took place. Since this story is very straightforward and basically tells us about the journey that a father and a son took to the harbor for the father to actually abandon the son. So the first setting is inside their house. This is where we are first introduced to the main characters of this story, the father and the son. Even though it is not explicitly stated, but we could easily infer it based on the text. So here is the excerpt of the story from the text. When I opened my eyes that morning, I could see my father standing at the basin by the foot of my pillow, shaving his beard for the first time in quite a while. A breeze blew in through the window and made the curtains sway against the crisp morning sun, which cast green-blue shadow over my father's face. Small birds were chirping outside. The window and curtain signal us that they are indeed inside of the house. Also, the son stated that he hears birds chirping from the outside. So the next setting is at the railway station, the transit place before they arrive to the harbor. Also, the train, is the medium that they use to go to the harbor. It is explicitly stated here that they took a train to go to the harbor. So, as we can see from the text here, we boarded the steam engine as it arrived. So, steam engine here is the train. So, the last setting that this story took place was at the harbor, the place where the father abandoned his son. So, it is also again clearly, explicitly stated here. We arrived at the harbor station. My father called out to the station attendant, who wheeled over 2 red leather suitcases. I got into a car with one of the suitcases and was driven towards the wharf, all while wondering when exactly my father had brought these 2 suitcases along. So yeah. Moving on, we'll look at the social setting in this story. During the Meiji and Taisho period from 1868 to 1926, Japan underwent deep change and modernization. As with any rapid societal change, modernization of the Japanese nation and society was a complex process. Modernization included, but was not limited to, rapid industrial growth, new governmental and economic structures, transformation of economic roles and societal structures, and the forging of a national identity. So, based on the text, we could assume that the social during that time, where early marriage is not something to be proud of. So, if early marriage is something that was common during that time, the father won't be ashamed of his son. He won't be pushing his son away from him just because that they might be mistaken as brothers. Also, the story also stated that people were saying that the father and the son only have 10 years of age gap. So, yeah, I think it is safe to assume that the social setting in the story was early marriage is not something to be proud of. Also, it is famous, it is a known fact in Japan that the people there are workaholic. So, it is also natural for young men to actually have big dreams. So, we can see from the story, the father actually left, abandoned his son to pursue and to start a new life. Since he is still young, we can also assume that he have big dreams on his own, and also he feel that with the existence of his son, he cannot pursue his dream. So it is ultimately for his dream for a new life, the father decided to abandon his son. Next is point of view. Point of view is the perspective from which a narrative is told. It indicates who is telling the story. So in this story, the son is telling the story. The story is also told from a first person perspective. So how do we know it is from a first person perspective? It is from the usage of I and we. Also, this is an example from the text. It is the last paragraph of the text, if I'm not mistaken. And that's how that morning I was abandoned by my father. From then on, I would be all alone and would have to go on living a life completely unbearable. But even so, and as difficult as it would be to recognize him, I must always keep his face in my mind with and without the beard. So the repeatedly use of I here is very apparent, and we can easily conclude that the story is told from the son's point of view and also from a first person perspective. The author purpose, tone, and targeted audience for this story. What is the author purpose for this story? I think the author purpose to write this story was that maybe he went through a life or grew up without a father by his side. It is more like expressing of what it's like to not have a father figure while growing up. The tone for the story was pretty much melancholic. He described his life was hard without someone to be there for him, imagining what it's like, but in the light of a father leaving the child behind at an early age. The author described how young kids don't get what is going on until a certain amount of time have passed away. For example, at the end, the son realized that his father left him when his father was on the ship while he wasn't on the ship. The targeted audience for this story can we assume it is more likely to target young adults and also kids about life, what it is to have a father or someone who we care left us. People who can relate are also those who went through or have this kind of experience.
Hi everyone, I'm Saiful Farhana and I'll be talking about the literary devices available on this short story. So the first literary device that we have is symbol, secondly personification, irony, and followed by imagery. Alright, without further ado, let's dive into the first symbol that can be found in this short story. So, the first symbol is the father's act of shaving off his beard. In the short story, as soon as the son woke up from his sleep, he felt weird when he saw his father suddenly standing at the basin by the foot of his pillow while shaving off his beard for the first time in quite a while. So, the father's act of shaving off his beard can be symbolized as removing his identity as a father. Well, I guess it's pretty clear that the father doesn't want to be associated as the son's father, because in the short story, the father told his son to stand further away from him so that other people won't assume that they are related. Hence, shaving off his beard also means that he is releasing his responsibility as a father. Secondly, the father's fresh, tailor-made, sweet-smelling straw hat can also be symbolized as the father's excitement to pursue new life without his son. I think it is so obvious that the father is excited to turn over a new leaf since he bought new outfits to change his new identity and to live his life as a brand new person. Later, towards the resolution of the story, the father actually used the brand new hat and waved to his son as the ship was departing. So the action of waving the brand new hat portrayed his action of waving his past life. So for the third symbol, the son also mentioned that his father bought him a new flannel cloth for him to wear to the harbor. So from this event, the flannel cloth can be symbolized as the father's last act of responsibility towards his son, because I genuinely believe that the father somehow felt guilty to abandon his own son. So I think it can be assumed that the father felt that by giving new flannel clothes to his son, he can somehow ease his own mind from the guilt of abandoning his own child. And the last symbol that can be found in this short story is the SS Sakusonia. This is the name of the ship that the father used to abandon his child. So, this ship actually symbolizes the separation between a father and a child, because as soon as the ship departed, the son will not be able to see his father ever again. Easy, right? As for the imagery in this short story, there are several imageries that we have found, namely kinesthetic, visual, organic, olfactory, and auditory. So let's dive into each of the imageries, okay? Firstly, let's take a look at kinesthetic imagery. I'm sure by now everyone already knows that author used kinesthetic imagery to plant the image of an action or a movement in the reader's mind. So, the examples that I can extract from the short story are from this line where the son said, "When I opened my eyes that morning, I could see my father standing at the basin by the foot of my pillow, shaving his beard for the first time in quite a while." So, from this line, the author used the word open, standing, and shaving to help readers imagine what the father is doing during that morning. Other than that, the line where the son said, "I tried to get close to my father, but he coldly pushed me away," also contains kinesthetic imagery where the author used the word push. Secondly, the writer also included a visual imagery to help readers to visually imagine the atmosphere or surroundings through the narrator's eyes. So, from this line, all the people in the houses under the violet and rose-red summer morning sky were most likely still sleeping. Well, the author used the visual imagery such as violet and rose-red summer morning. By doing so, the readers will have a mental image about the sky during that morning, because it was not pitch black, but instead it was a violet and rose-red summer morning sky. Get it? Moving on to the third imagery, the author also included organic imagery to help readers to understand or share the character's emotion through his writing. As you can see here, the son said, "Confusion swept over me." Other than that, the line where the son said, "I felt misery build up in my chest and I had to look away," also contains organic imagery. So, by using the word confusion and misery, it will help to depict the character's affective mechanism, and thus will help readers to understand the hardship that the character has to face. Moreover, the author also used olfactory imagery which help to depict the sense of smell that the character is smelling. For instance, the son mentioned that the smell of coty cologne wafted from the handkerchief and was so strong that it made me choke. So, by including the name of the cologne, readers can imagine the strong smell that the son is experiencing. Last but not least, the author included auditory imagery which can be identified from this line. Before long a gong echoed from within, and a steam whistle sounded from the fat chimney. Well, by including the sound of the gong and the whistling sound of the fat chimney, the author can help readers to imagine the atmosphere at the harbor through the sense of hearing. As for the irony that can be found in this short story, it happened at the beginning of the story where the son thought they were going to harbor for sightseeing and spending his time with his father, but unfortunately, it turns out the father wanted to abandon him. During the beginning of the story, readers would realize that the son is genuinely happy to spend his time with his father, because when the father told him that they would go out to see the harbor, the child said, "You mean it? Great!" Other than that, since the son asked whether the father really meant it to go for sightseeing, it can be assumed that before this, the father had made the same promise to spend time with him. Thus, the son is actually looking forward to spend his time with his father, but little did he know that his father actually wanted to abandon him. As everyone knows, personification is used by the author to give human traits or qualities to non-living things. So guess what? The author also used the same figurative language in his writing by including personification, which can be seen from these examples. So the first example that we have is A breeze blew in through the window and made the curtain sway against the crisp morning sun, which cast green blue shadows over my father's face. As you notice, the author gives human traits such as blue and sway to the breeze and curtain, respectively, to make his writing more vivid and descriptive. While the next example that contains personification can also be seen in this line. Before long, a gong echoed from within, and a steam whistle sounded from the fat chimney. As you notice, the author used human traits such as fat to depict how enormous the chimney is. As for the themes, there are several themes that we can identify from this short story, namely, the abandonment of a child or the negligence of a father, secondly, the eagerness of a father to start a new life, thirdly, the curiosity of a child, lastly, the child's response after being abandoned by his only family member. While the themes that I've mentioned will be further explained in the next slide. The first theme that we have identified is the abandonment of a child or the negligence of a father. The reason why we combine both themes into one is because the explanation for these themes are very similar. Well, in the short story, the father portrayed an emotionally abusive father by verbally threatening to abandon his own son after his son called him dad. Disgusted by his son's action, the father said, "Dad, you're an idiot kid, what made you think I'm your dad?" And then he threatened to leave him on the train if he starts crying. After both of them arrived at the harbor, the father really abandoned him on his own and departed with the ship. Well, this scenario truly depicts that the father neglects his responsibility to shower his son with love and care, but instead, he just abandoned him to start up a new life. As for the second theme, the curiosity of a child can also be identified in this short story. Throughout the whole story, it can be seen that the son was being very curious as he asked many questions to his father. Well, this is because the son felt weird that his father suddenly wear new hat and out of the blue wear new sunglasses. Not to mention that the son kept asking whether they are going to see a sheep or his father was just joking with him. So, from this scenario, we can assume that the son didn't get to spend time with his father before this as the father was being very irresponsible towards him. Well, in my opinion, the son asked many questions to his father because somehow I think the son felt unease with his father's new attitude towards him, and I think he can also sense something strong is about to happen. Thirdly, the eagerness of a father to start a new life. During the exposition of the story, the father is really determined to change his look because he doesn't want to look like someone's father anymore. I guess deep down in the father's heart, he felt as if his youth was taken away from him, as he had to live the life that he doesn't want to live. That's why the son was shocked when he found out that his father was shaving off his beard early in the morning. I mean, he can just shave it off later at night, but no, he wanted to shave it off before the people from his neighborhood wake up from their sleep. And not to mention that the father also bought new hat, sunglasses, and started wearing perfume. Well, by using these new items, he can feel like himself again, young and liberated. Last but not least, the child responds after being abandoned by his only family member. After waving his father his last goodbye, the son sat on a huge brick of the wharf while digesting what is actually happening to him. Can you imagine a child at that young age was abandoned by the only family member that he has? Of course, he was helpless and clueless of his own fate. That is why he was crying because he just realized that he has no one to live with anymore. And the sudden realization and acceptance that he would have to live an unbearable life shows that his heart was broken to pieces, which I believe would leave a mental scar in his mind.
The last part for this slide is the conclusion, where we'll discuss about the author message, burning issue, and also lastly, the moral of the story.
There are several messages that the author wanted to highlight in this short story. The first one is what it's like to not have a father. In the short story, the son wanted to be loved by his father, but unfortunately, his father is not willing to give it to his own son. So I guess we can say that the son had no one since the beginning of his life, as his father didn't play his role as the head of the family, resulting him to learn the meaning of the unwanted love at a very young age. Well, I think the reason why the author is highlighting this message is probably because he grew up with our father figure himself, but since the author died at a very young age, we can't give you any details about his personal life. Alright, so the second one is the child abandonments and its possible outcomes. During the resolution of the story, the son had to sit on a huge break all by himself because he is still trying to digest what is actually going on, because he had no one except for his father until the end. He ended up crying when he realized that he will live the unbearable life without his father. Well, I believe by including this message in the story, the author wanted his readers to think about the possible outcomes of child abandonment, such as having affective issues by not able to let other people to get into the child's life, as he is afraid that he will be abandoned again. And not to mention that this issue may also lead children to possess psychological problems. Now we have reached the last point for this presentation. One of the burning issues that we can highlight is teenage parent or young parent, which revolve around the father, of course. As everyone knows, the father is only 10 years older than his son, which suggests that the father had his son at a very young age. I believe this may be one of the reasons why the father can't show his love, because the father is inexperienced and really young. Can you imagine a young man with a burning soul who just started to explore the world, but instead he had to raise a son on his own? That's why he can't think clearly and unfortunately let his ego get the best of him by abandoning his own child at the harbor. Moreover, another assumption that we can make is the father cannot accept his fate, so he decided to abandon the child to pursue his dream, as the economy in Japan was blooming when the story took place. Hence, the author wanted to highlight this issue to ensure future parents will not repeat the same mistake that the father did.
What we can learn from this story. So the first one, we should never abandon a child, especially when he is at a disadvantage of understanding what is happening. The narrative surrounding child abandonment cases are different as the people involved. For example, in this story, the reason is the father being young and have the interest to start a new life. When people don't have money, they tend to move from one place to another. They don't settle in and they don't create any community attachment. When they do need assistance, they don't know where to go. As we can see from the story, they only leave the two of them, the father and the child. The father probably don't have anyone to assist him to raise the child. Children born out of confines of marriage may also be abandoned in a family attempt to prevent being shamed by community. We can also assume this is the cause of the father action, since the mother is absent in the story. However, this is still not a valid reason to abandon a child. Abandoning a child or anyone who needs a care is a crime, actually punishable by up to 5 years of imprisonment in Japan. However, it is generally enforced when someone abandons a person with no intention of retrieving him or her despite awareness of a life-threatening risk. The second moral that we can learn from this story is, if you feel like your children is burdening you, then it is not their problem. It is yours for not being able to map out things and plan properly. Fathers, just like mothers, are the pillars in the development of a child emotional well-being. Children look up to their father to lay down rules and enforce them. They also look to their father to provide feeling of security, both physical and emotional. When a father is absent, young boys look for other male figures to set the rule for how to behave and survive in the world. However, considering your children as a burden is totally wrong. Becoming a parent is a special thing. It brings enormous joy with it, a sense of achievement, having to carry a baby and gotten it out to the world. If the baby is healthy, life, smile at your family, what could possibly be wrong with that? Well, evidently a lot. Somehow, too many of the parents treat their children like a burden, and parenting like the hardest and most unrewarding thing that they ever had to drag themselves through. People, especially little ones, should never be referred as burden. This reduces them to merely like a number and an object. To call a child a burden reveals a mentality trapped inside materialism and individualism. So, for example, the father is very selfish, thinking only about himself. For example, it is also stated in the story where he said that he is grateful that the son could see him away. Clearly, he is only thinking about himself. He doesn't think about the consequences of him bringing the child along with him. Like he just left the child at the harbor without anyone to assist or bring the child back home. He also left the son behind without any proper care for the son anymore. I think that's the end of our presentation, and thank you so much for listening until the end of it. We realize that this is a very lengthy analysis of the story, and again, thank you so much.